Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call this special meeting of the Shelton City Council to order for June 11, 2019. I'm going to ask Commissioner Schutte to lead us with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just like to open by thanking all our commissioners for coming this evening and for their staffs and themselves for coordinating this meeting with our city staff and Jeff. So I know I really appreciate it. I think the council's looking forward to this, and hopefully we'll do it more often in the future. So with that, welcome. And with that, I'll turn it over to City Manager Jeff Knighton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, members of the county commission. As the mayor mentioned, we appreciate you coming. My understanding is this type of meeting between the city council and the county commission has not happened for several years, many, I think some people have characterized it as. But we're glad we're here to identify some items that we can work together and move the community forward in a collaborative fashion. Put our collective heads together and see if we can come up with something good for the people of Shelton and Mason County. So have a couple items on the agenda here, the kind of the format. I'll go through the first agenda item that's mentioned. It's the annexation and common development code discussion that we'd like to facilitate between the council and the county commission. And then I will turn it over to Frank Pinter here from Mason County to talk about the other two agenda items. Okay. So the first item on the agenda is, as I mentioned, the collaborative planning and annexation discussion. We did provide a map for each of you. We did want to display it up on the screen for the public, but unfortunately, when we put it up on the screen, we couldn't get the entire map there. But I do want to mention that this map will be available on our website after this meeting tomorrow morning, first thing. We'll get it added so the public can see what we're talking about as well. So when you look at the map, everything in white, kind of in the center, is already in the corporate boundary of the city of Shelton. Everything in the various colors are properties within the urban growth area, which many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the Growth Management Act and how that works, and it's the first step in an annexation process. Generally, there's land there to accommodate the expected population increase for the city of Shelton over the next 20 years at various densities. Our target in the city is 6 dwelling units per acre. So we added enough land the last time we did a comprehensive plan update in order to accommodate the number of residents there. What we wanted to talk about a little bit tonight, and I provided some examples to you of various entities, municipalities, and counties throughout the state who have entered into similar agreements to what we're talking about tonight. The one I wanted to concentrate most on is the interlocal agreement between Spokane County and the cities within Spokane County, because they did a study after it was implemented and found out what worked, what didn't, what might have been good ideas when they implemented it. So in order to avoid making mistakes that other folks have made, we dove into that document and tried to identify areas where we think we could improve upon their process. So the discussion tonight is about the desirability for an interlocal agreement among jurisdictions with land use authority in Mason County. That would be the county itself and the city of Shelton, since we are the only incorporated city in the county. And those examples are not exhaustive. There are many examples of these throughout the state. I just picked 3 to share with you because I think they illustrate various points of collaboration and benefit for both the city and the county moving forward. Collaborative planning for areas within the Shelton urban growth area would provide benefits beyond just predictability, which is the major theme of a lot of these agreements and of the study that was completed. Shelton will be able to annex areas that with the common development code that have similar infrastructure to what we already have. So planning strategically and with forethought, so when the areas in the UGA are annexed eventually at some point in the future, it'll make easier and more cost effective for the city of Shelton to serve those residents and those businesses that exist there when we get to that point. There's a couple of topics or a couple of issues that would also benefit Mason County, and that's the predictability of providing for, or predictability of being able to articulate their financial picture and plan for the revenues that exist and the revenues that, and the costs of service that will go away once those areas are annexed. So a couple items in the collaborative planning report from Spokane County that I wanted to highlight. If you'll go to that document, whoops, that off there. The collaborative approach, they found that the collaborative approach benefited all of Spokane County residents. The cities have a mechanism to influence issues and land use within the UGA. That means having city comments and city concerns expressed early on in the process when there's a land use planning proposal. And the county will have a clear service delivery and revenue structure that allows for fiscal sustainability going forward. The kind of overarching theme for a lot of these agreements was that both levels of government, both organizations remain financially healthy and strong. And you have strong planning going forward, and everybody knows what's going to happen and what's expected moving into the future. There's no surprises, which is kind of an overall philosophy here at the City of Shelton. We want to make sure there's no surprises for anybody moving forward. The big chunk of this that I wanted to talk about is on page 3 of that report, and those are the collaborative planning principles. And it will benefit, collaborative planning will benefit both jurisdictions as well as citizens and property owners of the entire region. There's consistency between comprehensive plans, which is a GMA Growth Management Act requirement, but as I'm sure you've all found at various points in times, doesn't always happen as seamlessly as it might otherwise. We can help that process along with a collaborative planning effort. Efficient and cost-effective provision of urban services. Now, urban services are things like curb and gutter, which typically don't happen in county areas. They're not required, but they are required in the city. So that's kind of what I was mentioning when talking about future planning and future infrastructure development within the UGAs. So all those things are already in place. Mutually agreed timeline and sequence for city annexations offers predictability to both the city and the county, as I mentioned. And there's a couple other points here. I won't go through them all, but the joint planning process recognizes the county's responsibility and authority regarding the unincorporated areas, and that is coordinated and consistent with the comprehensive plans and development restrictions the city will promote going forward. As I mentioned, determining the fiscal issues ahead of time so everybody can plan predictably for those. The original concept for coordinated planning in the urban growth areas involved in applying overlays and zones to the metro urban growth area and establishing common development restrictions. So, as I mentioned, predictability for everybody, from city to county to property owners to potential developers. They know what to expect, and when there's a certainty there is a more robust feeling of investment in particular areas of the county. If you have certainty, you know where your money is going to go, and you know what it's going to produce. There's certainty there that produces a comfort level for a lot of development interests. Connectivity between roadways, I think, is important, so we're not skipping around and making commutes longer or pedestrian circulation patterns longer than they need to be. And communication, I think, is the fundamental part of this, and that's part of the reason why we're here tonight, is to make sure that the county commission and the city council and both of your staffs collaborate and look for opportunities to help Mason County move forward. That's what I have to present to you tonight. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I would personally just like to see a conversation among our elected representatives and to determine what ideas are best and what direction we should move in.
Thanks, Jeff. Who wants to start the input or questions for Jeff?
So Jeff, first off, thanks for putting all this together. I think this gives us a lot to consider. The Spokane plan, looks like they had some outside help putting it together. Have you given any thought about to what, and I know as you kind of, you know, you're a few months in here, but as you kind of evaluate what the city's capacity is to engage in a planning process like this, have you thought about, you know, using internal resources, external, hybrid? Any initial thoughts on that?
Yeah. So as you read through the report, they were initially funded through CTED, which is now the Department of Commerce. CTED no longer exists, but it was really one of the first of its kind to incorporate both the county, and I think Spokane County has 7 incorporated cities, if I'm not mistaken. I think here it's a smaller, less involved process because there's only 2 organizations. And at least at this point, I think I'm relatively comfortable using internal resources and not requesting any additional money for outside consultants. One of the reasons why I think this is great is through the CTED funding and through Spokane County's efforts to put this collaborative planning process together, they've really given us somewhat of a blueprint. And as I mentioned in my opening, they've shown us where the pitfalls are. And it doesn't mean we won't make mistakes, but they've shown us we have the obvious pitfalls in front of us, and we can navigate those moving forward, and it's much easier for internal staff to do that.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that kind of struck me when I was reviewing, especially the Spokane, very well put together document, but just sort of maybe the topic and just in general, the sentence relating to, you know, many challenges that they face can be best tackled by working together and taking a big picture collaborative approach. I couldn't agree more on that, and I think this is where we start, right? As we open up the doors of collaboration, we start by hacking away at creating some plans, and the best part about plans is they can change and they can morph over time. But I think this is definitely something that, you know, the city and the county and other key players, you know, this is kind of the ground level where I think where we need to start. And the other part of this, and I think, you know, I don't want to speak on behalf of all 6, 7, et cetera, but we all share the same sentiments. I would hope that if the county's doing well and the county's prospering, the city should be doing well and the city should be prospering, and it's vice versa. If we're going to grow and we're going to prosper, there should definitely be a strong partnership where we're engaged with our county folks and encouraging that to kind of ramp out. So I look forward to seeing where we could go with this. I especially agree that I think we could do some of this in-house, but the specifics, obviously a lot to talk about there on that front. So.
And just to mention, I did put on the back of the staff report a couple of specifics, and this by no means we can include other things, but annexation procedures. So there's set steps in order to move forward with annexation. In any interlocal agreement, we can talk about what revenue sharing might look like. We can talk about infrastructure cost reimbursement, which, trying to look at this from the county's perspective, you have those areas now under your jurisdiction. If you put a lot of money into infrastructure, you're before it's paid off, you're obviously going to be resistant to annexing that to the city. I mean, I think that's a given. You put a lot of taxpayer money into the ground, and then it's, you know, the city reaps all the benefits. Understood. So that's definitely something that we can put in an agreement as well. Those types of specifics. And if it's a concept that everybody agrees on, I'm sure Frank and I and the rest of county staff can work out those details and present the actual details of that agreement to you later.
Commissioner Shea?
I'd just also add too, there may be some opportunities, in particular as we continue to work through the Hearst work groups and the RIA 14 work in particular, as it kind of relates to this general area. There may be some project funding available that we can tap into jointly that would make sense from an infrastructure perspective and benefit our residents, and you know, it's just a thought there for our groups to consider, that there may be some newer pots of money for us to potentially tap into to do some of that joint infrastructure work.
The other thing that came to mind is, can't forget Chief McKern in the back, the fire districts as well. Like, how does that all effectively kind of play into this understanding that, you know, in our case, you know, we contracted for services through our ILA with the fire district, but understanding that, you know, there is potentially other districts, other things within that may be affected by any decisions like this, or benefit from, or potentially not benefit from. So it'd be good to.
One of the complexities of this is our current fire district, I don't believe, covers our entire UGA. So there would be other fire districts that we would need to work with. That's an area, how those relationships get worked out between the fire districts, that I think is best left to those elected bodies. But there would be some added complexity there.
Other questions, input?
I would just say that if there's a time to look at annexations and city and county growth, this, for everybody's knowledge, this is an excellent time to do that, because before our city manager's career as city manager, he has an in-depth education and background in planning. And so in my conversations with him, he is, this is not his, what they call, first rodeo. So I'm excited that the city would be looking at this time, because it's not, I mean, I don't know, you went to school to learn all that stuff, didn't you? Yeah. So, you know, it's good to have a city manager who has an in-depth knowledge of, and has gone through annexing property and things like that. So I think it's a good time for the city of Shelton to look at these things, because it's good to have in-house experience, and that's not free. I mean, that kind of experience, I mean, I don't know planning, you know, and I have to learn as I go. And it's good to have somebody who is kind of a leader in the community that kind of has a background in that. So I think it's a good time.
Yeah, and I have negotiated, or I won't say negotiate, I've been a part of a negotiating team that negotiated a similar ILA to this, although I did not include it in your packet, because I may have a few biases about it. Just putting that out there.
Now we're gonna look at it, you know that.
2007, City of Vancouver and Clark County, if you want to take a look at it.
Okay.
So Jeff, I don't have, you know, the documents and stuff that you're talking about, so it's hard for me to follow it completely. Maybe I can get a copy of it so I can look over it later, but.
Sure.
You know, without a doubt, the reality is, anything that comes off, that goes into your tax rolls comes off of ours. So it's a loss at the county's end. I appreciate the idea that we're gonna look at some type of compensation strategy if we have investments, but we need to plan around some of these things. If you have areas that you're already looking at, I would appreciate if you'd share with us so we can look at what that's gonna be and what kind of impact that's gonna have. It's not like we can really stop you, so that's not gonna be the issue. But it sure would be nice if we had a heads up so we can start to prepare ourselves to deal with those things.
Absolutely, and that's one of the purposes of these agreements, is, you know, if both elected bodies decide to move forward with that, is to provide you with certainty. That's really the major benefit on the county side. So you know when these things are gonna happen, what they'll look like, what the process is, those types of things. And then with the agreements, as I mentioned, there's potential for revenue sharing and potential for infrastructure reimbursement on a given timeline, you know, 10, 15 years, whatever it happens to be, or 5.
So I gotta ask the question, can you kind of detail that a little bit, like what the revenue sharing would potentially look like to Commissioner Netherland's point?
Sure.
What does that actually look like in terms of, you know, the county's potentially lost revenues, city's gains, you know, kind of, if you can at a high level, explain that a little bit.
Yeah, usually what that looks like is a phasing. So you have, and this is just a for instance, and I don't, this is no concrete plans or anything like that. But let's say a 100-room hotel is built somewhere in the urban growth area. There'll have to be infrastructure in place to serve that use. That type of use generates a lot of traffic. There's going to be a lot of water consumption needs, a lot of sewer, those types of things. And it would generate a lot of revenue, tax revenue for the county. So in an agreement like this, just as a cost-sharing provision, we could structure it so that the county's revenue is phased out over a set number of years. So a percentage each year starts to come to the city once the property's annexed. And again, that's the major benefit, is it would provide certainty to the county and to their budget when they're looking forward on how they'll compensate for that lost revenue and how much revenue they'll gain because they're no longer providing the services to that particular use. So usually it's a phased plan.
Commissioner Trask.
I think common knowledge, I'm pretty excited about how we're finally working together and coming up with solutions. Growth is inevitable, and I know that we're all gonna move forward. So I think what I wanna make sure is that we continue to work together, continue to work with all of our staff, and then keep everybody in the loop,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah. Communication between the city and the county, hopefully this meeting will be held at least annually. I'd like to see that so that we make sure we know what each other's doing and we maintain relationships where we can talk about issues like this and make sure that we are as proactive as we can be as a government agency. A lot of the times we have to be reactive, but those opportunities where we can be proactive, plan for it, particularly on the financial end of things, I think is a benefit to citizens of both the city and the county going forward and on into the future.
Commissioner Shute.
Just a question either for Jeff or the council at large even. There's a lot of blue on the map. And so, I think maybe, to kind of piggyback on Commissioner Netherland's comments, are there any current plans for annexation that the council is discussing? Or where would you envision your annexation taking you in the next 5, 10 years based on this map?
Yeah. There are not any current discussions about annexation at the moment. But I can see particularly, let me back up, and I'll get a little bit techie here if I get too techie, just, but as Councilmember Krantz mentioned, I did do planning and annexations, all of this stuff for a long time. So I get a little bit excited about it. Annexations, annexations, when you're looking at annexations, there's a couple of provisions that the Growth Management Act has put in place, and there are opportunities that don't exist here on the county end, unfortunately, to mitigate some of those annexations. Cities, just from a tax and revenue perspective, never want to take single-family house properties. They just don't. It generally costs more to serve a single-family home. I've seen estimates that for every $1 in tax revenue that a single-family home generates, the cost of service is anywhere from $1.16 to $1.34. So generally, developed home sites, cities don't want to take. What cities want to annex are industrial and commercial properties because that's on the other side of the scale. They pay a little bit more in taxes than they actually cost in services. But what GMA has done is prohibited what they call a cherry stem. So if you've ever seen a flag lot, it's pretty much looks like a flag lot, just on a much larger scale. So you annex a section of road out to a big commercial area and you leave all the residential areas for the county to deal with. The other part of that is counties, occasionally counties that are operating under the Growth Management Act have what they call a boundary review board. So when there's an annexation that is proposed by a city for an urban growth boundary, the boundary review board looks at that annexation proposal and then has the ability and the opportunity to modify it. so that the city, when they're annexing commercial and industrial areas, take a ratio of houses to kind of offset those costs for the county. Those are the two kind of provisions that are written into GMA to control that activity. But where we would look to annex first, I would imagine, and I haven't talked to the council about this, but just looking at it from a land use planning perspective, we would look to annex large chunks of property, somewhere where there's an opportunity to grow our economic development base, where large employers could come in for a site automatically suited for their type of the need, shovel ready, as they say. That's what we would look to annex first.
Thank you.
I'll ask a question, Jeff. You mentioned that you feel, at least initially, current staff, I assume you're speaking for the city, could carry most of this.
Yes.
Would there be any advantage, I don't like to spend money, but have an outside third party be more of a facilitator of some of the interactions between the two organizations?
I think there would be, but there's a little bit of a duality there. If we're both looking at things from the same side of the table, there's a buy-in, a feeling of this is what's best for the community. If you have a facilitator that's almost functioning as a mediator, it becomes a little bit more adversarial. Not that it would with this group, there's a tendency to see that happen. And there's certainly an opportunity there, timing particularly. Doing it in-house, doing something like this in-house, or at least creating a framework in-house, would take a little bit longer than if we hired an outside consultant to do it for us. But then there's the cost benefit too. And when, with the desire of this group of folks, we start to work on a common development code, I think it's important for our staff and the county staff to be involved in that, so that when they go to apply it, they know what those provisions are for and what the initial purpose of them was, and not just reading words off a piece of paper and applying them.
Jeff, on that note, could you maybe talk a little bit about zoning and how that might play into, because right now, obviously, we have zoning within the city, we have zoning within the county, and outside of the fiscal impacts, we've talked a little bit about predictability, not only for us as representatives, but for our taxpayers, going into the process knowing what to expect and having some predictability in terms of the process for certain types of zones, et cetera. Would you mind touching on that? We've discussed it a little bit.
So now, this point in time, I think is a perfect opportunity for both organizations to take a look at this. One, because in the city, we have really, outside of the downtown core, we have one zoning category for houses, and you can do all kinds of things in that zoning category. So what we would be able to do in collaboration with county staff is create zoning categories for homes that match up with what the county does in their urban growth boundary. And if, and like I said, don't take any of this as this is what's going to happen, but let's just say, for instance, the county has a zoning category that is minimum 7,500 square foot lot in their urban growth boundary. We could create a category to match that. And or with a common development code, we could come up with a category that suits all of our needs, as long as we meet those requirements that we operate under of 6 dwelling units per acre. And that operates across the corporate boundary. So you could have 4 units per acre, which is about a 10,000 square foot lot, and then have an apartment development that creates 50 apartment homes on 2 acres. And if you average those out, as long as you average it out all across the city and it's 6 or above, you've met the requirement. So there's no real bright line on what the minimum has to be, although there's some tried and true methods to be able to get there. But that's something, if we work on a common development code, we can do together. We have the opportunity now. We don't have to change a lot of things that are already in place.
Councilmember Trent, or commissioner transfer, sorry.
So do you have a timeline? Do you have an idea when you'd really like to get started on this? Other than tonight?
I think that if both the council and the commission think that it's a good idea to move forward, at least putting a framework around it, that our planning staff at the city and the county's planning staff can start to build what that might looks like. And then we would make sure to check in with the council and the commissioners at each step of the proposal to make sure you're comfortable with where we're moving going forward. Something like a common development code, we could probably do in a year to 18 months. Annexation agreements or pre-annexation agreements would take much less time. And that the pre-annexation agreements would incorporate that common development code. 6 months, potentially.
Other questions, input?
It's gonna let me off easy.
I would just appreciate being able to get an idea of what we're actually talking about on paper, if you wouldn't mind sharing that with me as soon as possible. I see, obviously, for myself, I see where the first place would be, and it makes perfect sense for you, but not very good sense for our county. We establish a place up there by the airport for a hotel and get all the infrastructure and everything into place, and then after we're done, it's gone. And all the work and everything we put into the county just disappears unless we have something in place. So I'd like to see what it looks like so we can see if there's a possibility to work together. Because it may not be just that simple. You know, we have to protect our interests a little bit here too. That's our jobs as commissioners. But I have seen in the past other cities and counties put things together where they were compensated enough where it was a win for both. So I'd be curious to see what you come up with. So please don't take it as I'm completely against it. I can see it plain as day when I'm looking at this map that's in front of me, what I have to be protecting.
Sure, and we can put a draft agreement together, Frank and I can, and then bring it to you, share it with you. It doesn't necessarily have to wait for a council meeting or anything like that, just as a circulated draft for you to comment on. I don't know what Frank's schedule looks like, but we can definitely take a look at that and see at least a starting point.
Thank you very much.
I think this is a great conversation, and I don't know, I think it's probably maybe sooner than the better to have some start talking about this and some things. And I like the concept of sharing the wealth and, you know, not doing what you had kind of said. I don't think we're all in this community together, you know, and I think that this is a great opportunity for the city and the county to put, especially again with Jeff's experience in planning, to help us kind of guide us through this process. I think now is the best time to start doing this.
I mean, I agree. The city needs to grow. We're running out of property as well. And this meeting to me is how we can do this gently without hurting the county and also helping the city out. We need to grow as well.
Yeah.
So,
Randy, you're right, though, in trying to protect what you need, what you're working for. I mean, you're working for a lot of people. But I am confident that the city of Shelton will not go in there and just snatch it away. I am 100% confident of that. There would be some kind of a pre-agreement worked out.
As I said before, I've seen win-win. I've
Yeah.
seen it, so I know it's possible. I have nothing here, so.
Right.
And that's what we're aiming for here, is to create a win for everybody. We all live here, you know, we're all neighbors, so there's no reason not to do that. It's a lot easier dynamic when there's one county and one incorporated city. When you have, a lot of times, what you were talking about, you put infrastructure in the ground and a piece of ground gets snatched, it's because one city's afraid the other city's gonna take it first. It doesn't have anything to do with the county. So it's a little bit different dynamic here.
Yeah, I'll go ahead.
I'm sorry, and if I may, and going back to the facilitator question, when there's one county and one city sitting at this table, there's collaboration and we can get to agreement. When you've got one county and 7 cities sitting at the table, a facilitator is probably a necessity.
Yes.
So a facilitator here may be a hindrance and us getting to a collaborative ending.
Yeah, I'll just reinforce what I think Councilmember Schmidt mentioned in regard to what you said, Randy. Is I don't think there's anyone in the council who's not want a strong county. I mean, we're gonna have some other topic, one topic comes up that implies we need a strong county financially and economically, and we just wanna be a player in that. So I think our council's on board on that. Speaking for myself, but I don't think there's any council members wouldn't agree to that. Councilmember McDowell.
One way, and yeah, I want to assure you, Randy, one way to have a good, strong county with the only city, incorporated city in it, is to work together. We have to remember that as we go forward, that some of the decisions we may not like, but we have to look out for our partner.
And this is a bit of a unique situation in some sense too, because we've talked a little bit about the fact that the city is also serving as the county seat. There's a lot of services and infrastructure within city limits, and looking at how that impacts the growth of the city pattern, but also the growth in terms of county services is something we're gonna have to be very cognizant of as we move forward with this process.
It's one big happy family,
Sounds good.
you know?
Is there,
Do you have another direction?
I think we do on this particular topic. Frank and I will sit down and start talking about various provisions that could be in the agreement and how our respective elected bodies would view those provisions and how we might massage them and provide you with a draft. So you can take a first look at it and see if we're headed in the right direction or if, you know, we're completely off base.
I would just say too, we have our Director of Community Services, Dave Wyndham, in the audience, as well as our long-range planning manager, Kel Rowan. And so, just from the county perspective, to make sure that they're part of that conversation too, because
Absolutely.
that's the critical planning component of any interlocal agreement.
Yep.
is there a reason why you picked annually rather than quarterly for these meetings? It seems like a year's a long time.
Yeah, I think quarterly, we might have difficulty coming up with agenda items. These are more long-term meetings, and I know the chair of the county commission and the mayor for the city of Shelton are going to meet more often than that to make sure we all stay on the same page, whoever those individuals happen to be at the time. But that's something that we're focused on, is making sure those coordination meetings happen, and then as a full body, once a year, maybe biannually if something big comes up.
Okay.
And I don't think our commission would mind if we also met as needed.
Okay.
Biannually sounds more realistic to me if we're really thinking of starting a process. So, just off the top of my head.
Sure.
There's only 3 of us, so we're pretty
Yeah!
mobile.
I just had
Go ahead,
one
Councilmember
point or top question maybe. It'd be interesting to kind of see how we maybe target the areas and kind of the why, and because as we were speaking a little bit this afternoon, annexation may not always be the answer in some cases. There are always positives and negatives on all fronts. So I'll be interested to dive into this a little bit deeper, especially with our friends over here, just to see, you know, are these mutually acceptable pros and cons?
The way I see the agreement is there'll be a structure around the areas and then structure within the areas. So there's predictability for all parties.
And hopefully too, it would incorporate how we go about this process. So as we're considering making changes, we have a roadmap as to how we're gonna make those decisions and navigate that process so that that's clear from the outset. Certainly, I would hope we'd have a level of flexibility within that, but I think having an understanding of who's in the room, what those decision points are, and what we're considering along the way are things we'd like to outline to give some structure along the way.
Absolutely.
You know, that's why it'd be nice to see what we're talking about having on paper, because there are different opportunities. It's not always financial, straight dollar for dollar. You have utilities up on the top of North Cliff up there, and that whole region up there that connects to Johns Prairie. And I know there has been a lot of discussion over the years of trying to find a way to get those utilities out there so they can develop those areas. Those areas are outside in our areas, and they're not, it's almost like helping to, and I'm not suggesting, I'm just throwing these things out there. It's almost like having something you can exchange. You're building the infrastructure here in a residential, which you know you're not gonna want because you have roads, you have all the other debts that come with that you don't wanna take on. But yet, at the same time, we're building a tax base in a new area to benefit both of us. So that's why it's nice to have all the papers in front of us and look at some of those options. But I would just like to throw that one out as a possibility, something we should consider.
Anything else? All right, thanks, everyone.
Yep.
Okay, so we're on to the second agenda item, which is presented by Support Services Director Frank Pinner from the county on a cooperative lobbying agreement.
Thank you, Commissioners and council members. One of the items that was presented to be brought forward to the group is the potential for a joint lobbying agreement, and how that would work and how we would put an agreement together towards that end. One of the items, or towards the agreement, would be a requirement of what would be some of the guardrails for an agreement, what would be the purposes or projects that you might want to incorporate into that agreement as the scope of work for a lobbyist, how the payment structure would be developed between the two entities. Would there be a sliding scale? Would it be 50-50? And then obviously what would be the term of the contract as well. So those are items that I'd like to get some direction on and then work with Jeff in coordinating a draft agreement for the two entities. So with that, questions are, what would be projects? And then what would be the scope around those projects to develop a guardrail and a scope of work?
Thanks, Frank. Commissioner.
I worked on some of that with the EDC, and we have the EDC in here. We looked at some of the issues that we may face. I know one of the things that we were hoping for collaboratively was that we would keep side rails up so that we wouldn't hurt each other, for example. You know that the county may want to have something against annexation. You would want to have, we shouldn't have any policy issues that we're both jointly working on. It should be capital or some other investment to make sure that our partnership stays together and stays strong. Because we have a couple of people that work there in Olympia. I can assure you, if you go in divided, you get nothing. It's coming in together. That is the only way it'll work. But this other proposal that was brought forward a while back also included other entities such as the EDC and groups that were working with the EDC that were willing to eventually pay into this. Originally, the county was looking at covering some of that extra that was needed for the first year, but then it would slide. It was a sliding scale that would be offset by some of the donations and some of the things that the EDC was able to acquire from their membership. So I'm just throwing those out from the knowledge I have from the past issues that we brought forward. I think we should look at resurrecting that because it actually was a pretty good idea. A lot of people got together and already found a way to work with each other through the EDC, because some of those you have to understand are going to be at odds also. One of the members that was at the table when we had our introduction to your lobbyist was the tribes. And it was nice that they were able to come on board in the same direction as long as we were all focusing on capital improvements or capital projects. And they didn't see that as a threat. So, my 2 cents.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I know we've talked about this a little bit, and I know the deputy mayor and I have spoken about this as well, but I firmly believe that having a coordinated approach with the county, the EDC, and any other players, again, the bigger voice, right? That's gonna carry a lot more weight. That being said, there are certain areas as well that I know that will be it city policy, right? The county doesn't care about certain city policies, as it may not affect the county or the EDC, for example. There may be some things at our level within the city that we may still have sort of a horse in the race for. And understanding though, when we enter into the joint agreement, that is that bigger picture, that is that one voice. And I agree, the conflicts of interest between different groups, either public or private, because the EDC also has a considerable private enterprise component to it as well. Just ensuring that if we do enter into these types of agreements, that truly all the best interests are laid out in very black and white to that. And again, I'm supportive of that more collaborative approach. I think that's kind of the word of the day right now. So
Collaborative, if I may ask, between the city and the county as well as the EDC? Or city and county?
all three.
All components, okay.
Yes. Only because they put together such a good structure. You almost, if somebody does the work, puts it together and finds a way to make it actually work and brings people to the table that normally could be at odds with you. If we had a project and the tribe is at odds with us, that's gonna make it hard. You got the tribe on there at the same time. That was a big win when the EDC was able to pull that together. For all of us, actually.
I would say, though, I think there are occasions when the policy issues are appropriately shared, because there are times that things hit the desk in Olympia that affect rural areas much more than they would in a rural, than an urban setting. And I think for us to be able to come in as partners in those conversations and not always be project-based, I think that from a funding mechanism, that absolutely makes sense. But I think that there will be opportunities along the way where there will be some shared perspectives on some policy issue, and I don't want to eliminate that from the conversation as we move forward. And it's gonna be something that we're gonna have to look at year over year. But I would be surprised if there weren't at least some items that we were on the same page from a policy perspective.
Just if there are any examples of, for instance, this most recent legislative session where the city utilized their current contract lobbyists to advocate for policy, do you have any examples?
This past session was capital projects only, and that's a
Okay.
conversation that we've been having internally about expanding some of that work. But some of the things that we've talked about from a policy level are, it could be anything from unfunded mandates. I mean, I think we can all agree, we don't want the state passing more unfunded mandates that we at the county or the city level are taking on the financial burden. It could be things like the Hearst decision, it could be things surrounding affordable housing. I think there's a number of issues, even the gas tax type things that could fall under joint interest because of our rural setting. And so that's kind of where that conversation was stemming from.
And if I could just add one more point to that, so like, I think for us, a lot of times, we've relied on our association to do the policy work. And I don't know what your interactions with Association of Washington Cities has, been like, or if they provide those services, but I believe at the county, we've predominantly relied on the State Association of Counties and then WACO, the Association of County Officials. So there may be some opportunities where indirectly we're still supportive of those things, but still maintaining a capital budget first approach with, under a potential agreement with the work that Commissioner Netherland did with the EDC.
And if I may add, the Association of Washington Cities and the Association of Washington Counties do look for policy opportunities to collaborate where both city and county interests are aligned, and they inform us of those. So when that takes place.
Commissioner Netherland.
I'm about to use a word I don't like, and I usually it doesn't come out of my mouth, but this is an opportunity where it may come in handy. Considering that there will be 3 people at the table, that old concept of consensus might actually have a benefit. That, like I said, it's not one of my favorite words because I believe sometimes you have winners, sometimes you have losers. But if you have 3 legs on this table and everybody would have consensus, I don't see where there would be an issue. But I'm always going to be nervous about it because I don't want it to start an internal war between us because somebody doesn't like it. And that could easily happen. Policy is a weird thing when it comes to that.
There is no doubt that negotiations always have winners and losers. And there's always, someone's got to give up something somewhere. And I just think that the people in this room are willing to work together to build things together. But obviously, not everybody's going to agree on everything. And so this is a great start right here.
So I just want to make sure I'm hearing correctly. If we do we do end up with the joint lobbying agreement, it would be for capital only, but then policy issues on a case-by-case basis.
Reasonable.
Sounds that.
And-
Are you okay?
If you're comfortable with that, with the idea that, because I'm very much in favor of
Capital.
capital, but I understand that we have to work together, and we have to give a little bit. If you find that it's important, there may come a time where it may be absolutely necessary, and I don't want to cut it out. So I'd be supportive if that is what it takes to have you be supportive as well. Commissioner Schutte, I'm curious.
Yeah, I could certainly live with that. I think we'll find that we work far more on capital projects than we do policy, but I mean, I think, up to the deputy mayor's point, I think there probably will be some overlap occasionally that, we'll have an opportunity to work on policy issues that affect both the city and the county, so
Especially when we have unfunded mandates as a recurring issue and.
We all agree on that,
There's
right?
only one group of people that think unfunded mandates are good, and that's the legislature.
Exactly.
So there we have a lot of.
Some of the legislation.
Right, yeah. But I would be open to an agreement that would allow for capital first, policy on case-by-case basis.
Okay.
I think that would be a good working situation. I'm a part of the steering committee for WASDAC, and there are a lot of city issues that do come up. And so it would be good to be able to communicate with you guys also on this.
Just as a side note, there are a lot of cities don't agree on all city issues.
Yeah.
Just because you got, association-wide cities, trust me, small rural cities do not have a lot in common with big cities. So there's always that debate too, so.
And you have hundreds, we only have 39, and we still can't do it either, so.
Okay.
Okay, I think then we have enough to move forward.
Deputy Mayor?
And just one comment.
I'm sorry.
Both Commissioner Netherland and I sit on the PRTPO and Transportation Organization. And one of the things that in my short time there I've seen is how important it is to identify those projects on a timing basis, because sometimes something that we're willing to give up for now in exchange to support something else, that those dollars can really be leveraged. I think that my hope would be we as a council and a commission are willing to have those conversations, because as you said, there's winners and losers, and there's only so much money in the pot. So being able to have those conversations prior to session and say, we know that this needs funding and this is why, and make the case, so that sometimes we may be putting a city issue behind a county issue or vice versa for the whole. That's not gonna be an easy process, I can't imagine, but I think long-term we have to be willing to do that if we're going to really start making steps and gaining some really necessary projects in this area.
Hold on. I'm
Commissioner
sorry.
Pratt. Go ahead, Commissioner Pratt.
I can see us also working together. Let's say that you have a road that goes to the county. Well, that road may need improved past the city. So I see this as working together. Together, we can impact a lot more
Railroad.
projects.
It's almost like that's a real-life example.
Imagine that.
But I would just also add that upfront work is gonna be critical in order to make this successful. And, being able to identify projects that are, key to both of our successes, I think it's gonna be a lot of work up front, but I think it'll be worthwhile in the end. And then I think it'll give our legislative delegation a clearer picture of where we're headed as an entire community. So it makes things a little bit easier on them as well, I think, as they get into session.
Commissioner?
Just on a different note, I want to let your commission or your council know that you sent great representation to the PRTPO when it comes to infrastructure and stuff. You really did, and I just wanted to pat you on the back for that. It's always nice to have not just somebody that's related to us in that room, but somebody that's very competent and related to us in that room. It's very helpful. So compliment to your selection there.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anything else?
I think we have
Is
direction on that one.
you guys satisfied? Is that
Yep, oh,
good?
absolutely.
All right.
And the final item is in regards to the county's proposition regarding the public safety sales use tax. And in that regard, the Mason County's Public Safety and Criminal Justice Task Force, a couple of years back, made a recommendation for increasing revenues to the county specifically earmarked or dedicated to criminal justice and public safety. The Mason County Criminal Justice Working Team Advisory Committee just recently did the same and recommended the 0.3% sales tax increase for public safety and criminal justice. And then last year, the Mason County Citizens Budget Advisory Committee also made a recommendation specifically for the 0.3% for the county to initiate that proposition and that proposal, which then the county did. They acted on it in Resolution 4119 this year, and will put on the ballot in August a proposition for a 0.3 sales tax for criminal justice, public safety purposes. There's a small handout with some of the general information, but to generalize, the revenues that could be generated by those dollars would be about $1,300,000 for the county and a little over $800,000 for the city. These are additional revenues, because the city is already receiving a portion of 1%, 0.1% for criminal justice, which the county receives a 40% component of. So with that, I'll turn it over to our chair to discuss what the specifics are for that.
Very good, thanks, Frank. So just to kind of follow up on Frank's comments there, again, we've gone through a process this year of evaluating, some revenue to help address, in particular, our jail issues in the county, of which I'm sure the council is very familiar, as is your police chief, who's here in the audience with us tonight. This was vetted through the county's criminal justice working team, of which Councilmember Krantz is a member, and he has been on that and beating the drum for a new jail for quite some time. And
8
so,
years.
yeah, nobody's counting. So, so we've had a number of conversations around that, and so this is the first step first of a few steps towards addressing a new jail, but this would help provide some relief for us at the county in the near term. And if you look at page 2, there's a breakdown of the expenditures that this would help fund, the programming that would help fund, and if you look at the top there, it's all geared toward increasing capacity within our criminal justice system to address the constraints that we have currently. And we also have looked at providing some additional mental health and reentry services, peer services for individuals in the jail and coming out of the jail. And so one of the things that we've been concerned about is recidivism, and so how do we prevent people from continuing to come through our criminal justice system. And we know that the majority of folks that are coming through our jail have either a substance use disorder or a behavioral health issue. And so we're using this to look at addressing those critical issues within the jail too. And so we're putting this forward to the community for a vote. It'll be on the August ballot. And so we're hopeful that it would help us address some of our immediate needs, also though providing a look to the future as we consider all of our options with a new jail facility.
Just before we start the conversation, Jeff, you and I had a little conversation about the city's position and public position on this. There's a little something we can do and that we can't do. And being one that wants to be in 100% compliance with things like the Public Disclosure Commission, I think if you could make a statement, there's something we can say and something that we kind of can't say.
Yeah, so any official act of the council needs to go through a public hearing process with a vote for a resolution, either yes or no vote for a resolution, during a public hearing process where you have to give both the opponents and the proponents of the measure at equal time to express their concerns. as individual council members, I don't think there's any prohibition that I'm aware of.
What
on your
about the
position.
city's endorsement of this, the city talking about?
That would be the resolution, but as far as individual council members, you're free to.
Well, I'm for it.
Okay. That was easy.
There you go.
One of the restrictions,
Go ahead and throw it out
piggybacking on that comment, some of the restrictions are, and it goes along for the county as well. The commission cannot support the proposition. The commission can identify, and we're in the process of developing a document to that effect, facts of what are the issues around the proposition, but the county can't outright come out and support the proposition that it's put on the ballot for the citizens. So once we've developed a fact sheet, then that'll be presented as well to the city, and it'll be in on the website for within the county.
Yeah, so, I mean, in that regard, this is purely educational material for everybody's consideration. And, you know, we're happy to ask or answer any questions that you might have, you know, kind of as this process unfolds.
Well, speaking from a neutral position, I do know that it is a huge, huge need for jail space and in this community. Okay, so, I'm passionate about it because I've been on the Criminal Justice Board for 7, 8 years, and I think that it's important that the people get an opportunity to say if it's important to them.
And
Deputy Mayor?
Jeff, we've had some conversation, very peripherally about what this might look like for the city, and how those funds might be spent. Do you think it's something that if this moves forward with the fact sheet from the county, we would be also looking at putting out information on how that would impact city residents and services? Because while we aren't the ones putting the proposition on the ballot, it absolutely will have an impact for our budget, but also for the services to our residents.
Absolutely, and we would put together something similar to what the county has put together about how we would spend the additional revenue to enhance public safety, our criminal justice operations within the city of Shelton.
Since taxes are such a delightful topic for anyone to talk about, ever, you know, definitely one of the things to look at is, especially on our side, is just where the crosswalk, you know, this is an expected revenue and where we see this revenue being plugged in. Because when I read, you know, for criminal justice purposes, it's kind of an ambiguous phrase. I mean, we can file lots of things under criminal justice purposes, understanding the greatest need and being able to do what we can with those funds, and understanding that, you know, it's not necessarily a bad or a good thing or whatever, but, you know, our biggest chunk of funding in the general fund is law enforcement services for the city. And to be able to bring in a new revenue package to support that, and I believe the tolerance of our constituents is, cops are a good thing in this community, and it will help us in many, many ways, I think. I think it'd just be good for us, though, at the city level, to be able to detail very clearly to our constituent base what that would look like. And I know the chief's got some great ideas up his sleeve there. And my second, if I can take a second quick one, is we talked really kind of at a high level about jail. New tax revenue isn't going to necessarily build a new jail, correct? New tax revenue would be supporting and sustaining jail services, et cetera, as you guys kind of laid out. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of the jail plans? I've been out of the loop on the jail issue. Just go for it.
Sure. So I'll kick it off, and commissioners, if you have any additional comments, please feel free. But yeah, so the breakdown is we did, when we considered the revenue that would be generated by this, we did consider a jail funding and improvement reserve to help cover some of the initial consultant costs as we get that process up and running. But we also know that if you build a new facility with increased bed capacity, that you're going to have to staff that, and you're gonna see increases in those costs. And so we've also built this in a way that we're also starting to look at addressing those issues as that gets up and running. And the nature of the conversation at the commission has been, and I think this is what we're working under currently is, you know, we're gonna spend the money as those positions are filled. And it's just, we're gonna hold it in reserve until they're, you know, filled and moving forward with that. And so that helps kind of build a reserve for those things going forward, and allows us to address some issues now. You know, the other part of it is we have some funding here for inmate outsourcing to help, you know, with some of the management and of inmate population, kind of thing. So that's money that if a new facility were to be built, that could be then transitioned into operational funding for a new facility. Commissioner, do you have any?
You did well.
Anything else? I know I personally appreciate you guys taking this on, because that's been probably the largest issue that I've had since I've been mayor, or since I've been on the council, is the issue of public safety and the issue of the jail. So I really appreciate the Commissioner taking this on. So,
And if I may add to the Commissioner's answer in regards to the question around where is the jail and the joint jail review, the county, Mason County and Grace Harbor County have entered into an interlocal to contract with KMB for consulting services to do a demographic study of both counties, and then come back to both counties with a recommendation on what a joint jail would look like and where, and how it would be funded and how large it would need to be, as well as what Grace Harbor might need on their own, as well as Mason County for ourselves. So we end up getting 3 analysis at once for what each individual county would need and what a joint partnership would look like. And that partnership would generate its own efficiencies to some degree because of the scale of one regional facility as opposed to 2 separate ones. That agreement is coming to the commission with a contract for services from KMB. The Mason County Commission has already drafted some modifications to go back for draft revisions of that agreement. We're still waiting for Grace Harbor's council or commission to come back with some of their draft recommendations. And then we should be moving forward with a combined contract submission to the commissions before the end of this month, which would put a report back on their desks somewhere around Christmas, early January of next year.
next year or
January of next year.
of 2020?
2020.
And I'll just add, just for a little perspective, so I had a chance to talk with some folks in Skagit County who have built what I think is probably the newest jail in the state, county jail in the state. And from their initial conversations in their community to getting the jail built and open, took them about 10 years. And so we know that we have an issue today, and we can't wait 10 years to solve it. And so this is a short-term way to begin to address some of those issues, and we know that there's gonna have to be a bigger conversation about funding a new facility, but this would help us get some relief in the short term, so that we can continue to move forward with both looking at a new facility and take care of some of the issues that we're experiencing today. And so there's plenty of work ahead of us, and this is just the first step.
This may be a ridiculous question, but is this money, is there a sunset on this tax increase? Does it have to come before the people every 4 or 6 years? or-
Not this project, no.
So this money is a yearly income to the county and the city,
Correct.
which then funds these positions because the positions we want to continue on.
Correct.
Okay, so just,
It's long-term funding for long-term staff increases.
Councilmember.
Yeah, what you see on what's being brought forward on our side is increase, not replacement. Almost everything you're seeing there is to bring on new positions, new programs, money set aside for outsourcing, separate than what we have currently.
And this is flexible enough from our perspective where it can transition into, if we get into a new jail facility, funding that new jail facility as well.
Councilmember Dorsey, do you have?
Yeah, the new, this new jail funding, are there grants for that sort of thing for a jail, or is that something that's totally on the community? Does anybody know?
Typically, it's bonds, it's, you know, I mean, that's how most communities build theirs. You know, we may be able to look at other partnerships. You know, there's already some DOC infrastructure in the county. There may be, you know, from a location standpoint, there may be some partnership opportunities there. I don't recall, and Commissioner Trask may have additional insight on this, but I don't recall jail projects receiving funding in the capital budget. You know, but because it's never happened before, doesn't mean that's a good enough reason to not ask or consider it. And it just, you know, we can have that conversation down the road, or, you know, when we have consultants on board and we get into that process a little bit. But typically it is a community-driven project. And I believe our current facility was built, when it was built in the mid-'80s, was built with state dollars, because there was the Sentencing Reform Act went through in the mid-'80s, and the state saw that and took responsibility for some of those changes and provided funding to build jails. And so if you go across the state, you'll see that there's a lot of facilities that look like ours. It's because of the state's cookie cutter approach to jails. And but since then, I don't think there has been much given to counties for jail projects.
I've looked at that in the past, and the only thing that I saw, there's monies that are available, but they're federal and they're for immigration processes. It's the only thing I've ever found. I'm not saying do it or not do it, I'm just telling you that that's the only ones that I've ever seen exist out there, except for little tiny ones that are never gonna get us where we need to go. They're great with those $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 grants, but
And again, this conversation has been going on for like 7 or 8 or 20 or 30 years. And that part of the reasoning with the proposal of joining forces with Grays Harbor and Mason County is hopefully there might be some cost savings in that joint venture. And this, as I said, we've talked over every possibility inside and out continually. And so it's great to see some action being put to this. The studies and the consultants and the things is where you start with this. And I'm really hoping that in the future, in the less than 10 years, there can be a jail facility to actually put all the people that need to be in there.
Be able to use it.
Can I ask you a question to follow up? So if state funding provided funding for our jail mid-'80s, was that a trend throughout the state? Because if that's the case, there might be an opportunity to look at some sort of coalition similarly to this, that the city did with our water sewer infrastructure, and look at maybe banding together with other communities experiencing this to look at it from a higher level, because I don't think a single jail facility in Mason County might be a very attractive project, but if we're looking at some sort of funding mechanism across the state that's affecting numerous communities, that might be something worth checking into.
Yeah, I agree. I think that might be a worthwhile conversation to
But I
have.
think we're getting a little outside of this particular
Yeah.
topic at the moment.
Yeah. Towards that end, there is a cost to the Department of Corrections for outsourcing their inmates currently, which is a huge drain on the state side's fiscal dollars. And if they can transition that into partnerships with communities where they can not contract through Swift and Certain or other types of outsourcing, but directly contract and partner for bed space, that's less expensive for them, and they are very much more inclined to participate in cooperative funding for that.
Commissioner Trask?
We were talking about the capital budget, and I think that there might be creative ways that we can go about asking.
Yes.
And so it's not gonna hurt to ask. I mean, no doesn't hurt that bad.
No, no, no.
No.
I've had lots of no.
Not asking
No, that's-
is no.
Right, right.
So, like the sewer funding coalition, it could be like the jail funding coalition.
Correct.
Maybe it could work there too.
Anything else on this topic?
I will just say that I hope that as we move forward, we can be really clear, we can very clearly articulate to our constituents what this impact will be, and be very clear that this is not an immediate solution to building the jail, that this is a long-term strategy, and hopefully will have some immediate impact on our public safety. And really encourage conversations with our law enforcement and our public safety folks at the city and the county level who live this day after day and look at some of those creative opportunities with mental health and behavioral health resources and some of the other issues that folks are facing. Because I think it's very easy to wrap this up in a bow and say, this money is gonna get us a jail, and setting that expectation is going to bite us all at the end of this, because that's not what's going to happen.
That's right.
But I think we need to be very clear about what those facts are on both sides about what the new revenue will mean and how that will be impacting city and county services.
And as you take a look at what we have here, if you have any comments or feedback, you know, as you get questions in the community and, you know, if this doesn't, if it isn't sufficient, you know, let us know and we'll continue to tweak things as we go forward.
Okay. Anything else from Frank or Jeff?
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else from the group?
I don't know if you've noticed, I never come to your meetings. I don't believe in
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, well, I don't believe in jumping over those lines. You know, we have enough stresses. You guys are asked to go to meetings and do all the education that's necessary to make your decisions. And I would trust that that's what you do, and you don't need somebody else that's not doing that jumping in front of you from another entity. So that's why I don't show up for your meetings. So wanted you to know that, but this might be an opportunity to talk about it for briefly, just a couple of things. I get phone calls, of course, we all do. One of the issues that you've had in front of you is that issue of the park that's next to it. I don't know where you guys are sitting on it. I brought up some of these things to my commissioner yesterday, I think it was. You have a gentleman in the audience here, George Blush, who called me and had an idea, and I don't know how much merit there is to it, so I want to share it with you. And that's the idea of putting some type of significance on the tree that's already there within that entity that may stop it from being able to be taken down. Another one, though, to think about is zoning. I don't know if you've looked on whether or not that's 2 parcels or 1. If it is 2 parcels, you may have the opportunity to rezone that into a park zoning only, and they're not going to be able to turn that into a parking lot, and you do not need concurrence with the property owner to recreate some zoning. I wanted to throw those out to you, just options for you to consider. But there's one other thing. Several years ago, the commission put aside about $500,000 for the Gateway project. And you may not even know that. I know that we did talk about it, and your commissioner, Sharon Trask, is aware of it. You might want to bring her in and start having conversations with her, because it's her that would bring that to the commission on how that would be spent, if it would be spent. It's not in writing, it's not in mandated, and the commission doesn't have to vote to approve that, but originally that's what it was put aside for. When you guys came to us to talk about it, it was funny, because here we had just been told, no, we're not going to collaborate. Then they came in and asked for collaboration, and the whole time we had some money put aside. Just putting it out there to let you know that that's what was done several years ago. It was put in there, in that fund, and my recommendation would be to get a hold of Commissioner Trask and start having some of those conversations on where best the county can help you on that, because it's both of our issues. People coming into town, if it looks really good coming in, that helps all of us, but it's also county coming into it, so that's all I wanted to.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Any other parting comments? Deputy Mayor?
And just to echo some of the conversations you and I have had, and that we've had with the commissioner and the council members, I would just hope that we continue to have these open conversations, not just at this meeting, but that we're calling one another as items are arising, ideas, concerns, et cetera, because we all are here to do a job. And the more that we can have candid conversation and communicate with one another, I think the better off we'll be. I guess kind of going with open policy with all of our electeds and our representatives, because as you well know, you probably get a call from someone who says, I live in Shelton, and they may or may not live within city limits. So making sure that we're getting people answers and doing the work that needs to be done is something that we're all gonna have to work together on.
Thanks. Anything else? that, we are adjourned.
Didn't bring up the whole.